Okay, folks, I think we're going to dive right in. A big welcome to everyone who is joining us this afternoon or this morning or this evening, depending on where you are in the world. I know we have a few international participants. It's a huge honor for me to get to spend some time, not only with everyone who's dialing in, but with three experts in the room today. Today, the plan is basically for me to ask these very smart and experienced folks some questions around professional development, and if we have enough time to perhaps pick up on some of the questions that were submitted from the audience over Twitter during the last few weeks. So without any further delay, let me dive right in and briefly introduce each of our speakers, and then I'm going to hand over to them. First up, we have Danielle Lewis-Egonu. Danielle, can you give us a wave so people know who I'm talking about? Fantastic. So Danielle is currently Deputy Chief Exec at the Golden Thread Alliance, but very excitingly, she starts as the CEO of Cygnus Academy Trust in September. She has worked in school improvement and leadership for over 15 years, supporting schools, leaders and local authorities across London and Kent. Danielle recently authored a chapter in the Outstanding School Leadership book, which was published recently by Bloomsbury Education. So congratulations on that. We also have with us Nimish, who is Curriculum and Research Lead at Creative Education Trust. Nimish is also a very experienced senior leader and an author. His book is called Shimamura's, you're going to have to remind me if I've got it right, Shimamura's MARGE model of learning and action, which actually I think is one of the most helpful, succinct frameworks for how to apply kind of cognitive science to effective teaching. Nimish is often found at these kind of events or national conferences, sharing his love of learning for research-informed strategies and professional development. And then last but not least at all, we have Rachel Ball, who is a senior leader in charge of teaching and learning and professional development at her school in Salford. She's also a senior leader in education, or SLE, and is a passionate history teacher with more than 20 years of experience in a classroom. You obviously moisturize very effectively, Rachel, and you're the co-editor of the recently published book for history teachers, What is History Teaching Now? So as I said, a bunch of very smart people here, but let's not pump their egos anymore. Let's find out what they think about professional development. So first up, Danielle, can you just say hi and give us your thoughts to kick things off?
Hello, everybody. I'm really excited about being on the panel today. I think for me, professional development is key. I was asked the other day, I think, around as I'm moving into my new role and visiting my new trust, they were asking me what's my specialism, what are the things I feel that are the real crux of my expertise. And when you've been in education for a very long time, you have many, many different hats that you wear. So leadership development, I feel, is really something I value and put a lot of energy and time into, because professional development really is fundamental to us as a profession, because we want to keep people in our profession at all different levels. It's not just going into senior leadership. There's professional development in all different avenues, and sometimes it's shining the light on the possibilities for individuals in schools because they think there's only one route and one direction, when actually there's so many things that you can get involved in. So professional development for me is really at the core for our practitioners, our support staff, our teachers, our leaders, and it never stops. I think sometimes think that there's a cap, and there really isn't. There's so much you can diversify within.
Great. Yeah, absolutely agree. It's not something you can master in one lifetime until they come up with like a solution to death. We're really going to get to that point. Nimish.
Thank you, Sarah. So for me, professional development is almost like an entitlement for every individual in any organization, be that in education or outside of education as well. Everyone deserves to learn, to become better at what they're doing. And in the way that we work with them, almost we should be trying to serve them in terms of on that journey, on that path to betterment in terms of how they're going about things. That doesn't mean that they're not great at what they're doing already. Part of professional development should also be them sharing what they are doing already to help other people. So it's that whole idea of collaborative professional development that I'm such a fan of, and people working together through professional learning communities or whatever it may be, but also with some steer and and some direction in terms of what are some of the best bets that can help improve practice in terms of all that we do.
Great. Well, looking forward to hearing some of those bets later. Nimish will be coming back to you for that. Rachel.
Yeah. Hi, Peps. Yeah, for me, I'm really passionate about good professional development. I think I've been in my school for a long time, and I've seen some historically really bad approaches to professional development, and I think it can quickly go wrong. And there's lots of issues in terms of having the right culture to set up good professional development. But I think it's so important that we create the time and the space as leaders to make that professional development effective, because it is this massive lever that we have in improving student outcomes. So yeah, I think it's a long game. I don't think it's something you can make right overnight. And that's why I think one of the biggest things we need to do as leaders is be strategic in our approach to professional development.
Wow, thank you. Okay, so clearly a few common themes here. First one around the kind of value or importance of professional development. Okay, I think everyone here would probably agree. There's a bit of survivor bias going on, but fine, we'll live with that. But secondly, that because there's only a finite amount of time in a lifetime and in a career, we have to be quite strategic in our choices, and there are better and worse bets that we may place in terms of effective professional development. And Rachel, you said that you had experience of things that didn't necessarily work that well. And my first question to the kind of panel, and anybody can jump in at any time, is what approaches don't seem to be a good bet when it comes to helping teachers and leaders get better? Where might schools and trusts want to avoid wasting their time?
Shall I kick us off?
Go for it.
So like I just said, kind of one thing for me is really not having a very strategic plan. So perhaps as a CPD leader, thinking about maybe not even starting with what is the problem first of all, but going straight into something new that you've seen, something buzzy from Twitter, and thinking, oh, this looks great, let's try this. And I think that's something that I've seen happen quite often, actually. And whereas as leaders, we need to really be thinking, first of all, what problem we're trying to solve, and not tackling everything at once, but thinking really carefully about our strategic program that's actually going to make a lasting impression on teachers, and not something that's a quick one-off session, which is going to be just lost and everything is transient.
Have you got any examples of like fads that have been grabbed off Twitter? Obviously, nothing that I've tweeted out. Great, so but any other things?
I think coaching has the ability to sometimes that people think that it's the new buzzy thing at the moment, and having experience of launching instructional coaching in my school and seeing it in other schools as well locally, that I think it's something that's very hard to get right. And if you are thinking in July that you're going to launch a coaching program in September, that's a problem for me, because there's so much groundwork and work around culture that needs to be done in order to make something like coaching be effective.
I wanted to just jump on the back of what Rachel was saying. I completely agree, Rachel. And kind of from my perspective as well, it's whether people understand what CPD is. I think it follows on from what you're saying about coaching, mentoring. Do organisations understand what professional development is? And I know it's a given, but sometimes one of my mantras is don't presume. Don't presume everybody understands what you're talking about. So some people think that just information sharing is CPD, but actually what underpins that is that there should be progression, there should be some consolidation or collaboration, but I think sometimes going right back to the beginning and people understanding what is it that you want from professional development, what is it there for, so it's the best use of everybody's time, and then tapping into the resources and seeing what fits in that organisation. I think we make lots of sweeping comments very often and presume everybody in the room understands what the nuances of that language, and quite often, going back to when you said, Peps, about when things go wrong, it's when people don't understand underneath the nuance of what's the crux of what we're trying to do here for the people that we work with or are serving or trying to develop.
I think alongside that, I think something interesting to consider would be if for like a Matt or someone coming into a school, if they're approaching a situation thinking, I've done this before, I know this works, these are things that I could put in place that will just move things forward. Sometimes if we haven't properly checked in terms of what's already taking place within an organization or within a school that might be there for specific reasons based around the context of that school. And I know not everything is context dependent and not everything is context independent, but it's important to understand why practices are taking place. And I think sometimes a good bet wouldn't be just go in, lift and shift what we've got that knows that works from somewhere else and just put it straight in. Understand where you are, what's going on before we try to put any strategies in place.
Great. And just to wrap up this question, has anybody got any like really concrete examples of when PD has gone wrong, or either from a school you've worked in or another school that you've heard about? They've tried to implement something, and after a while have de-implemented it essentially, or let it kind of die or wither and die.
I'm happy to give an example from my earlier career, when I was leading on this an area, and I was trying to upskill leaders in terms of their knowledge base around it, and just try to go through things too fast in terms of where I wanted the place to be. I wanted knowledge to be at a certain point, and just went step by step through it, just not adapting to what was happening around me, and essentially not taking an approach to it in the way you would in the classroom. If people haven't got it, you should stop, make sure they all know it, then carry on. That real check for understanding that happens in a classroom should be taking place in terms of how we deliver CPD, not just on a granular level within a session, but also over a sequence in terms of a period of time. And yeah, that was something I learned the hard way, but learned very quickly, and therefore continue to try to do in my practice nowadays.
I totally agree with that. So I was just going to say, really thinking about leading CPD sessions exactly like you would a lesson. So going into a CPD session and not seeing what the teachers already know, not chunking up your explanations and just kind of launching in with 10 different strategies. You would never do that in the classroom. And I think too often as leaders, we just jump straight in because we're so excited about something.
I'm incredibly lucky to work with some wonderful leaders that have modeled that to myself, to help myself get better at that, across the trust that I work with, both leaders in schools and leaders as part of the central team, but also just the frank nature in which our staff feel that they can talk to us to say, well, actually, what about this? I'm not entirely sure about this. And I think it's really important that we build those sorts of organic cultures within our organizations where people can talk in that sort of way.
High levels of psychological safety, Nimish, right there. Good. And as Harry Fletcher Wood, the genius, would say, teacher learning is just learning. And yeah, I think there's a lot in there for us. Okay, so moving on, talked a little bit about what doesn't work. Let's dive into what does work. Okay, so what does seem to work? What does seem to be a good bet, and why? And what conditions are needed for those best bets to actually work well?
I think I'll start off. I think what seems to be coming out for me is culture, and it's so integral, and it's very difficult sometimes for new leaders to really conceptualize and make that a tactile thing. How do you develop culture? And it's really just about relationships. It's more than that, but it comes down to relationships, and education is a relationship-based profession. And we like to be with each other, and we love to chat, and we love to talk, and sometimes we completely forget this. It's collaboration. And when you build that culture of collaboration and trial and error, it's okay then if people get supposedly wrong. Get things wrong in the learning experience. Actual research is great for that. It gives a complete open forum for someone to just pick an idea, run with it, and then if trial and error, if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. But what have we learned from it? What's the learning from it? But it's still about the collaboration. It's still about the trial and error, and it's about the discussion. I use the term professional dialogue all the time. Sometimes when I'm having a disagreement in leadership teams, but professional dialogue, there's such gold nuggets of having those opportunities just to discuss things, maybe in a fiery way, maybe in a calm way, but having that forum. But it again comes back to culture, a culture of development, and not high stakes accountability around that, I think, is one of the key successes of professional development.
Yeah, 100%. One of the first things that I put in place here in terms of our professional development culture was this understanding that we're all on this journey of development. As Dylan Williams says, we can all get better, not because we're not good enough, but because we all need to, and we all should be continually improving. But that is not linked to any sort of judgment. It is completely developmental. And I think that's quite a long process if you're working in a school where there has historically been a judgment-based culture. To break that up can actually take, as I've seen, several years. But you can get to a point where people feel that safety when going into classrooms is not something that's brings fear into teachers anymore, and then the learning then rapidly does improve.
I think alongside that, when we're talking about how we want cultures to actually be built, sometimes we think we need to write it all out. We need to talk about it. We need to discuss it. 100% we need to have a code for what the culture that we want within our organization. We need that somewhere. However, the way in which practice actually changes is when people actually just go out and do it. Culture is learned when people are actually modeling it in front of others. I've seen that happen. Again, just mentioning the wonderful people that I work with, as they go about in the ways of working, that has meant that people around them are picking things up in those sorts of ways and working in the ways in which they're working. So the idea that we model culture very, very clearly is such an important thing to do.
I think one other thing for me is really thinking strategically again about the balance between your subject-specific CPD and your core CPD, and not believing that everything will work in every subject and launching blanket strategies across schools or trusts, and really allowing subject teams to think about whether strategies will work in that subject, and if they do, how can they be effectively implemented, and giving subjects the time to kind of discuss and work that out together.
I think that's also a similar sort of approach that MATs can take towards CPD as well, where there's commonality in terms of things that they want in place across all schools within their matter. I know myself and Peps have spoken before about the idea of default positions, that this is the default position that we all do, but if you've got something better that you want to add on top of that, great. But we all have to at least reach this bar. And I think that in terms of the entitlement of CPD, I think is a wonderful approach. I think the other thing is that trusts, when working at that sort of level, but also within schools, really need to listen to the people that actually know what's going on, which is the people in the classroom, and they are significantly more informed around issues or problems that need solving than anyone else in the organisation. So a year 6 teacher in a primary school, a history teacher in a secondary school will know more about what needs to actually happen to improve the life chances of the pupils in front of them than anyone else sitting in another organisation or another part of the organisation. If we want to know what's going to improve pupil outcomes, which is part of the game when we're talking PD, we need to listen to the people that are on the ground in that game.
Rachel, I'm going to push you to be a bit more concrete here. So I'm in the audience on this call. I have just been promoted to the position of PD lead. So basically, your job that you're doing, and our school hasn't really taken a highly intentional approach to professional development so far. Okay, teachers have been good enough for a long time, but now we have an aspiration to be even better. What are the top 3 things that I should try to get into place in the next year?
I think the first thing is establishing what kind of vision there is for PD, if there is any at all, and really thinking about the message. Like I said before, is changing that message of we're all going to keep improving and we all should be improving. I think the next thing is your shared language. Does everybody understand what great teaching looks like? Have they seen that codified? Have we got models of what that looks like in practice? And I think once you've got that shared language, then you can talk about change. I think the other thing for me, and this is something that has become more and more important over the last couple of years, is the deliberate practice side of PD. And when I first started in the job, I was so traditional in my approach of everyone gets together, I tell you some strategies, you go off and try one. And having done so much more reading over the last couple of years and on this instructional coaching journey, even without the instructional coaching element, making your PD have an element of deliberate practice within it is so important. And it's no wonder that when we go and visit classrooms, we don't see teachers changing, because they haven't had deliberate practice to actually change those habits in the first place. We've done things like, when we deliver CPD in school, we will create scenarios and we'll do deliberate practice around those scenarios, and we'll talk about what this might look in a coaching conversation, and giving teachers and all support staff as well that really concrete opportunity to practice, so that then when they go into the classroom, they are making those lasting changes.
I just wanted to just jump back in just to talk about kind of the expert being in the classroom. Yes, completely, teachers need to know how to move children on and move children forward, but they don't always. And I think when you go to direct coaching or direct teaching or instructional coaching, sometimes we are blinkered and we cannot see that we maybe don't have exactly the right momentum of what we're trying to achieve. And ultimately, we're in this caring profession, we're in this relationship-based profession, and we cannot disregard children's experiences and having discussions with them as a part of professional development. I very often say to staff, we choose to be here, but the children have to be here. It's the law, it's legislation, they have to come. They might be able to switch schools or do different things, but when they're in our care and they're trusted, we're entrusted to educate them and move them forwards, we should still tap into their experience and their requirements, and that can still be for nursery children all the way up to further education. They are very clear on what their expectations are when they come into school. And so yes, as adults, we need to be there driving professional development so we can get the best outcomes for children, but sometimes we do forget to talk to them as well, because they are the service users, they're the end user, they're the parents. Yeah, that's one aspect, but ultimately it's the children that we have, sometimes for 6 years. Mobility might be 1 year, it might be 3 months, but what experience are they receiving in the time that they're with us? What's the best possible opportunity they have, and professional development, reminding people that's why we're doing this. It's for those people those young people that we're encountering on a day-to-day basis.
I'd just like to echo that point. I think it's such an important point that we speak to students as part of any evaluation of any PD program or any sort of quality assurance that we're trying to do, to check that things are landing in the way that we wish for them to land, purely because they're incredibly sharp. They know what's going on. They know whether it's in a secondary between lesson and lesson and lesson, whether there's consistency there. It's one of the quickest tests of consistency, talking to students. But also, if we're wanting to develop students' understanding of something, they need to know why we're doing what we're doing. And actually, if they can articulate it, we know we're doing the right sorts of things. I've been incredibly lucky to go around many schools, talk to many students. I've been taught by some wonderful teachers. And when you hear students turning around to saying to you, we do this here because this, or this helps me remember more, or something like that, it's such a wonderful and humbling experience.
So Danielle, I love the phrase, Danielle, teachers have chosen to be there, but
I've said that
students
haven't.
However, it creates an interesting conundrum, because teachers don't necessarily choose to do professional development always. And yet, if we want our students to have the best possible deal, we need teachers to be as good as they can be and continually improving. So how can we, really concretely, how can we increase what we might call teacher buy-in for professional development?
Goes back to what Rachel and Nimish said, I think, back in maybe the previous question around incorporating them into the why. Why are we doing this? Not just because the children have to be here, but what are the trends in that particular school? What's coming out from the data, from the observations, from feedback from individual staff? And if you're approaching professional development in many different ways, a lot of the time staff may not even realise they're engaging in it. Particularly if it's discussion, if it's listened often. I love the ECT framework. I know there's been lots of different viewpoints on it. And it does give people a structure who may have been kind of stabbing in the dark at where they go next with how to develop ECTs. It's giving people that structure. And listen often is something that's really key for some people, particularly blockers, because again, I've done this way forever. I don't need any more professional development. Why am I having to change what I've done for the last however many years? But actually, little and often discussions and approach it from a different way, rather than sitting down in a different space or what they're used to. may open them up. There are some people, I think you just have to accept as a leader in some capacity. Some people do not want to engage in professional development, and that's a very different discussion depending on what their journey is. And you have to be brave as a leader to say sometimes to people, actually, maybe this isn't the organisation for you then, because for our children, this is an expectation for us that our children get the best possible offer, and this is what our staff need. And there are often times where there are some people who are the particular blocker, they move on, and that completely changes the dynamic again of the culture in that environment. But approaching it from different ways and showing a package of professional development with a strategic approach, say that there's different avenues. You may not like it in this form, but why don't you try it this way? Often prevents that blockage coming through into the school system. And actually, there's fewer people that are resistant, and they haven't necessarily got an argument to say, I don't want to engage, because everybody else is benefiting so much from that open culture, that trial and error. And there's no, again, I use that term, that high stakes accountability again. Sometimes people come with fear because of their past experiences, and we need to recognize that sometimes rudeness and abruptness comes from a place of fear. And once you unpick that, most people will then jump on board, and they're probably normally the champions in the long run that take things and say, I was completely opposed to this, but yeah, I was convinced, and look at their trajectory. And it's really lovely when those situations happen, but it doesn't mean it's not tough. But that's what is wonderful about the challenges of education.
I think the other thing is when you give staff some sort of autonomy or some sort of professional decision around their CPD. I mean, when I first started, I made perhaps a mistake of everybody having the same sort of material, everybody sitting in the same sessions. And over time, I've changed my approach massively so that staff have got much more autonomy over which CPD sessions they go to, as well as the personalised coaching. And the feedback from staff I've got so much more buy-in because I can choose how I do the CPD, I can choose when I do the CPD, which CPD fits best with my goals and what I'm thinking about improving, but giving them that sense of ownership, I think, can be really important.
I think that ties in with the idea of relevancy and meeting of need as well. When we meet people where they are, when they realise why I think certain things that they're doing are relevant to their everyday experience in a classroom or a specific gap that they have, it will increase buy-in in terms of as what teachers want to do, but also it will contribute to what we were talking about earlier, which is a culture of actually people listen and then people act on whatever information, whatever intel they're gaining about needs.
Danielle, I love the radical candor with which you approach your buy-in situation. If you're not on board, then maybe this isn't the right place for you. I think I'd love to see more conversations like that going on, because it really sets the expectation incredibly high. Nimish, are there just like a quick one-line answer? Okay, you can either take it or pass, and I'll give you the next question. When you come across a teacher who doesn't see the point of professional development, they've had bad experiences in the past, and they think they're good enough and they're happy with that, what phrase do you use with them?
God, it's a tough one. It is an entitlement for our pupils that we all become the best version of ourselves.
Oh, look at that. Yeah,
Awesome.
I've put him under too much pressure, but he just rose to the occasion. Incredible. Okay, I hope everyone's making a note of that out there. Wonderful. Right. Just gonna wrap up this question on best bets, and I just want to nail down the implementation piece. And one of the questions that always comes up is time, right? What are your kind of top tips for making sure that we're able to, schools and trusts are able to carve out sufficient time for professional development when budgets are so tight and cost of supply cover is so great?
I'm happy to sort of kick off on some ideas that are not my own, that I've stolen from others, that I've seen other people use. So recently, I've spoken to Tamina Begum at Forest Gate School, and from her, I got the idea of actually taking twilights. Well, actually, schools have done twilights for years, where they've taken disaggregated training days, taken 2 out maybe, and split that into 4 after schools over the year. what I'd never even thought about, and it's so simple in its approach, but such a wonderful thing to do, is, well, rather than split them into 4 after-school sessions from 2 days, take it further, split them into half-an-hour sessions. So that's 24 half-an-hour sessions you could gain. That's half an hour every other week. And if we just link that to what we know about cognitive science, if we link that to what we know about people forgetting, well, little and often is better, as we know, and therefore we are more likely to remember what we do. So in terms of finding time in situations where we're all time poor, that was one of the most effective strategies that I saw, that I just think is very smart, very clever, and just builds in time for us to do what we need to do to support staff in the best ways that we can.
Any other time tips? These are gold dust, folks, if you have any.
I think what we do is very similar. We do disaggregate twilights into smaller sections like that. We try and keep everything on the same day of the week and make it as easy and accessible for staff as possible. We're also really lucky in that we have a subject meeting during the school week. So once a fortnight, subjects can meet together, and that really helps with giving us that little bit more directed time after school for meetings. But I do think it's a massive challenge.
I'm going to be controversial then. You plan. And if you as an organisation believe that professional development is key to organisation, you are radical and you change things around. You have to treat time like a resource. It is a resource. So you factor it into your budgets, you factor it into, there's lots of different ways. It doesn't have to be monetary factoring in, but sometimes it is. You look at your school days. Can you adapt school days and academic years? Lots of MATs are now changing their academic year, because you cannot squeeze everything in and do it really well. So yes, having smaller, little and often sessions, of course, but the beautiful thing about academisation and MATs is that we can be quite creative with how we change up the whole structure of our year. And it's taken a few CEOs and brave individuals to say, actually, yes, we need to prioritise this, because in order for our children to get the best, our staff need to have the best. And it's slowly filtering and trickling through. Yes, you have flexible working. It's not compatible with the education sector, because for obvious reasons. If you have children there, you need a person in front of them. So you have to approach it in a different way through restructuring your year, your academic year. We know what hours children need direct contact with, and you can look at different organisations and how they've been created with that. But you speak to the staff there, and they feel that they are valued and their professional development is valued because of the changes that have been made. And it's, we have been built on an institution for the Industrial Revolution as an education sector. We're not creating factory workers anymore. And we are striking and we are being very vocal as a sector, because it's just, the model's just not fitting with what our children need and what our staff need to move forward, what we want for the future. And maybe people are starting to listen to us in the sector now, outside of our sector, and realizing we're not saying these things just for fun. We actually can see the damage that this is having on our education system. So as well as kind of the great ideas that were just suggested, I think there needs to be a very big fundamental radical change in how education is seen and how teachers are valued and support staff are valued. Because if we're saying professional development is key to moving these children forwards, then we need to see time as a resource, that it is, because it's the most valuable thing we have.
Time is like money, and I've heard lots of people almost use that phrase in the sense that it is such a valuable commodity. And actually sometimes when people are in organizations, they forget that we're all time poor, and we need to see time like a resource, in the sense that if we are doing something we want to do something new, then what are we taking away to find that time to actually do it? But also one of the colleagues I work with always tells me, when we take people out of school to do these sorts of events, we have to use every second of time that we have them so wisely, because every second they're out of school, they're away from the students. And therefore, we need to find a way to ensure that we're using that time wisely for the benefit of the children and their outcomes.
I think it comes back to when you realise how much of a commodity, how valuable that is, and going back to whether people understand what professional development is, or whether it's information sharing, you make those decisions when you're strategically planning that actually, does this need to happen here? What value is it going to bring? How is it going to move things forward? You really have an acute focus on it. in a way that maybe we historically we haven't, because we've just been trying, and it's no fault of anybody, we've been just trying to get through, trying to meet the demands that have been put on us as a sector for GCSEs, and that became tagged and Key Stage 1 data, SATs and phonics coming in that was only meant to be in for 2 years and has now lasted for however many years. And we've got all of these things that are pushing against us that we have to deliver. But ultimately, in order for us to keep these fantastic people we have in the profession, we need to invest in them, and we need to recognise that their time is valuable, our time is valuable, and it's a wonderful investment that we need to look at. And there's really lovely models for that happening nationally. It's not, you know, it's lovely to see that happening. It's regional. It's people are really thinking, okay, how best can we do this? Let's consult with parents, and parents are much more open to that now as well, because they're all in different flexible working patterns. And so we've got a whole opportunity and a pinnacle point for a culture shift as a nation. Maybe I just talk about England mainly, and particularly as a leader, you know, we all look outward. We look at different country models, and we look at what's happening in different spaces within in England as well. But you look at business models, you just look at how the world is developing after this, you know, humongous situation that happened, the big C that took place. But actually, yes, it was an awful time for us. But in education, we are only just now kind of feeling the aftermath for ourselves, because we haven't given ourselves that time to actually breathe and reflect. And actually what we went through as a sector, we're feeling it, and we feel that something needs to be different. And I think that's important for people on the ground and teachers and support staff to hear from leaders, because they think that we keep churning, but we feel that too. We've been through that roller coaster ride as well. We want that radical change to happen, because we can see the benefits of us just investing in ourselves as a sector, because it's so needed, and our children need that as well. We can come back to them.
I find it really interesting how you're talking about academisation a minute ago, and the role of maths in some of this work. And in terms of with professional development, I think maths form an incredibly large part of the work that can happen there, because they have the flexibility to work in ways potentially that other organisations or single academy trusts possibly even, or singular schools can't. That the ability to be able to pool resources together, both time and financial, to make things happen in ways that you just couldn't do if you were by yourself. And I'm happy to use the example of where Rachel has come to support people in the trust that I operate in. She wonderfully devoted her time to come along and speak to our history leads, where they wanted to talk about how can we improve extended writing in history. That was one of the needs that was identified from the learning communities that we'd set up. I approached Rachel to attend, and she wonderfully gave her time to the leads. But it's that whole idea of, if we weren't set up in the way that we were, if we didn't pull all that information together, if we didn't work in the way that we did, we wouldn't necessarily be able to operate as an organisation on that scale.
I think sometimes there are little tiny creative things you can do as well. And this is, I'm not sure if this is a good example or not, but obviously during COVID, we moved to remote parents' evenings, thinking about directed time. You then normally would have trapped time before a parents' evening if you're starting at say 4:30, 5 o'clock. By going remote, you then don't have that trapped time. That's allowed us to claw back a few hours. So sometimes there can just be some real creative things that you can do, just give yourself that little bit more time.
Danielle, as someone who has experience at primary level and EYFS as well, are there, for a small form primary, are there any particular challenges that they might face, and any solutions that you have come across?
So for a one form primary school. Yeah, I love one form primary. I'm currently based in Kent. We're across Kent, London at the moment, so we have even half form primaries, or a primary where everybody's pretty much in 3 classes across the whole school. It is an extremely huge challenge for smaller schools, and you find the most creativity in those environments from pure necessity and having to work collaboratively. Definitely as a sector within the primary sector, I think reaching out, very much like Nimish and Rachel were talking about, reaching out to other schools, local schools, to offer some capacity. You'd be surprised at how many people in education are just happy to help, and it's not necessarily cost implications at all. It's a favour for a favour. You come and watch my setting while I take my 3 staff members who run the whole school out for a certain period of time, and do a swap. That is one of the most valuable things, and then instantly you've got a network that you've developed. outside of that, it's around, again, looking at the structure of your school and planning. It really comes down to planning and looking at your academic year. When are there key events when maybe a teacher can be released so that there's a key event that's happening in the school that frees up one member of staff, or how you can do that on rotation, looking at how you're using your inset days. You can, even if you're a local authority school, you have your set inset days, but you can play around with some of the timings of that and slot them into different places, or reduce or have half days, or look at how you can develop those different pockets of time to bring the teams together. Because it's great also having individuals going off by themselves, but sometimes you just want the teams to come together. And in a small school, you're constantly like tagging in, tagging out of situations, so you're all together, but it's not a professional development time together where you're having that professional dialogue, where you're saying, okay, I'm in a mixed year group where I have children from year 3, 4 and 5. I'm really struggling with my adaptive teaching for this group. And yes, that does happen. They have children from all different year groups, and then you can come in and have a look at planning together, or distribute some of that workload. It's the planning. It comes down to the planning and the communication. And maybe planning for a year may sound quite daunting. You get into the habit of that. But I plan from summer to summer. So my summer terms are completely flat out. I know everybody's are. As a leader, I am organising everything for the next academic year, in everything prepared so that I can give all of my staff information ready for the summer, that ready for September. So they don't actually have to do lots over the summer. They know what's happening. So starting your cycle in a different way of how you plan your academic year for professional development, it may sound like just moving it to summer isn't going to make a massive difference, but you're able to have that foresight and action things before the September comes, and then you can see, okay, maybe there's hiccups and deal with them sooner rather than later. But it comes down to the planning of that academic year and reach out to people. We are very collaborative as a sector, and we forget that sometimes. There's always someone that wants to kind of help or lend a few hours.
Wonderful. Okay, let's pivot a little bit to think about evaluation. So we've talked about, some bad bets. We've talked about some better bets. Now, how on earth do we know whether our professional development is working? What's the kind of litmus test for you in your context?
I'm happy to start something off here. Sorry, Rachel, you go first.
I was just going to say that I think the tendency is to jump to outcomes and say, well, our professional development must be working because our outcomes are improving. And I think that can be quite dangerous in that there's so many things that feed into student outcomes. And I think there's other ways of evaluating the CPD, and to consider whether it's effective in terms of teachers' confidence, teachers' ability from quality assurance processes that you might have in your schools or MATs, whether you're seeing staff practice actually visibly changing in classrooms. Of course, outcomes are going to be there, but it's not necessarily just that.
I agree with what Rachel said there in terms of it's a very messy thing to look just at outcomes. So many things can affect the outcomes of a student, and quite often it's the last thing to shift, as I've been told many times, time and time again. I think the other interesting thing alongside all of this is that quite often, thinking specifically about my context as a leader within a MAT, it's what I'd usually do if I was, say, working within a school as an assistant principal or vice principal. I'd put the CPD in place, I'd do some deliberate practice, I'd get them to contextualize what they're doing for something they're potentially doing next week or the week after, and then I'd try to go and see as much of it I can in action. As a MAT leader, it's nigh impossible to do that with 15 schools as you're going around. So there's an element of having to train the checkers, train the people that are going to go and check the fidelity for you, not checking up on people, but checking that things are going the way that we want them to be able to go, but also supporting them with what they need to make sure that they can do what they need to do to contextualize whatever we're asking them to do into the setting. That's a lot of do's in a sentence, but the point that I'm trying to get at here is there almost needs to be like an army of people that we're working with to support what happens in schools, because you can't be everywhere all at once. But that all comes back to a very clear shared understanding of what we're talking about as this element of CPD.
I think from my perspective, I think that it's about semantics again. Outcomes has become a bit of a dirty word, but it is all about outcomes. But I think our understanding of outcomes is what needs to be redefined, because we've it's been used by all the powers that be as a high stakes accountability word, but actually it's not. And you become a detective, you become the best detective on the planet when it comes to measuring and quality assuring or seeing what the outcomes are. And outcomes are not just data that are statistics that get sent off to be put up as on league tables. Outcomes are discussions with teachers, discussions with children. Outcomes is, some part of it is the data, but it can be data from a child's starting point. And actually, if a teacher that is using professional development to support them in a SEN's nurture room, then the outcomes for those children are going to be very different looking at the engagement model than outcomes for year 6 or outcomes for GCSEs. But understanding that there's the starting points for where the outcomes need to be end up is a really key thing. So I think we need to reclaim the word outcomes as a sector, but we need to reclaim a lot of words and a lot of things that have been imposed on us. And when we think about the culture of professional development, we have to have benchmarks, and we have to have ways to measure that, but outcomes shouldn't be the dirty word. So it could be confidence, it could be, we've got so many ways of measuring or looking at the effectiveness of the practice that we undertake, or the initiatives that we're trying. And you know, I worked in inclusion part of my career. I spent a lot of time in inclusion, and outcomes of national outcomes was not necessarily my focus at all, but I was looking at how I can measure well-being, how I can measure things in different ways around looking at snapshots. And there's so much way to gather evidence, but you just need to put your own framework around it. And it goes back to what Rachel and Nimish were saying about what is your framework, what is your vision, what is it that you as a school, institution, class teacher, department lead want for your outcomes, and are you articulating that really clearly to the people that you're working with, so that all your professional development is in place because you're working toward the outcome. Our culture is that we try and error and we do the best things possible for our children to get these outcomes, to get an outcome of excellence of mental health and well-being, or an outcome. I think, of course, we see these words and we think the negative connotations of them. Of course we do. I've been in the system the same as everybody else, but we need to reclaim what that means. And actually that empowers us when people are coming to impose questions on us. We're about to go into a new framework where we're going to have lots of new questions, and who knows what our chief inspector is going to ask of us next. But if we know who we are as a sector, as a school, as an individual, as a department, then when they're asking us what are the outcomes, how are you measuring the success of the professional development and leadership and management in your school, you can say, well, this is what we do and I'm the best detective and this is how I know. So I think it's being the best detective and setting your own framework of what that looks like, and that will be different. We talk about context a lot, and it's rightfully so. Each context should just decide their framework that they're working in, and be really proud to scream and shout that when someone's asking how and why you're doing it in that way.
I really like what you said about it not being necessarily data per se, that it can be other things. I think the danger, I think it's the Enzers that write about it in their CPD book, that if you only use like data, then you start to only value what you can measure, and actually some effects of CPD just can't really be measured in you know, a really concrete way. It's that kind of the kind of examples of when you go into classrooms and you see things being done, you don't want to measure that. That's not that that's going back to judgments again, and that's not what we want. Yeah, so I think it's just difficult. Just that link, I think, is a bit messy, really.
I love the detective analogue. I can just imagining lots of like, you know, PD leaders going around with a pipe.
Like, she's coming, she's going to ask us questions.
Yeah. One final thing. Okay, great. Yeah, great rich answer on that one. Okay, penultimate question here. Nimish, I'm going to pitch this to you first. I know there are quite a few trust PD leads in the audience today. So what are some of the specific things I know you've touched on a few already, but what are some of the specific things that trust PD leads need to be thinking about in terms of getting PD right at scale?
It's a really tricky thing, and I've not been in the MAT game for particularly long. I think it's been just over 2 years. Again, really lucky to work with experienced leaders that have taught me a lot about how to get MAT PD right at scale, I think the first thing that I've been very explicitly taught is getting the culture right around MAT PD is incredibly important. Ensuring that staff are aware that the PD that is being put on is specifically for them, meeting needs that they have put in place, and therefore building the mechanisms to ensure that that can happen is almost like the first thing that I suggest. How are we collecting from heads of department, from subject leaders, from senior leaders, from classroom teachers, what the needs are that they have, grouping them, pooling them together, sourcing support to fit those needs that are both subject specific, phase specific, and sometimes even down to people specific. I used the example earlier of how Rachel came to do some work at Creative Education Trust for history in terms of extended writing. I've had needs that were found, both ad hoc natures throughout the year that needed to be fixed there and then within like a couple of weeks, but also some that we managed to hold in terms of a set piece event. But getting the culture right is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you just have to get on with doing it rather than actually just talking about it. So finding that way to gather the information until you need, and ensuring that it's staff's voice that is heard as part of it. We're also slowly seeding information as you're doing this, giving people that bigger picture about where things are going as an organization, and just being really authentic about it, being really transparent about, this is where we're going to go next. These are sorts of things that we're up to. These are all things that I've learned from leaders around me that seem to have a massive impact in terms of PD at scale.
Great. Danielle, anything to add there?
I think what I was thinking about was innovation and inspiration. I'm really fortunate that I've had very varied experiences throughout my career and worked alongside really different people, different contexts, and really inspiring people who I've learned so much from. And I'm also very fortunate that I've entered into this time in education where we've come from maintained schools, and now academisation and maths and single maths have been incorporated, and been a part of merges myself, and looked behind the curtain as such. And what I can say is that everybody is finding their way as they go, because there has not been a set plan, a set framework, a set structure, which we love in education, but a lot of these decisions have been put on us. So we haven't necessarily had these big speakers in education or people that have galvanized us and got us together. Instead, actually, we've had to navigate this whole system and find our way. And actually now we're teaching everybody else how to navigate and find our way. And I think when it comes to professional development on a mass scale, now more and more organisations are recognising that we need to collaborate and work together. And it doesn't matter if you're a MAT or a single MAT or a maintained school, we're all in the education business. And one of the things I'm really, I feel that has really developed me as a professional has been looking outside of education completely as well, and looking at business models and going to NHS CEOs and just emailing people of books, like looking at leadership books and speaking to the coach of the All Blacks in New Zealand and saying, well, how did you develop this? And reaching out to people outside of our sector, because we have a very new world that we're currently in. And if we can look inside in education, but we also need to be aware there's a whole world out there. We're very insular and we talk to each other in the same language. So getting a different perspective, and they don't worry, they are in awe of us in education. And they always say, I don't know how you guys do it. And so they are in awe of us, but there's so much to learn about the development of us as practitioners and models. We don't have to create everything from scratch, is what I'm saying. So when you're starting to think at mass scales, none of us have ever done that before. None of us have had to think about professional development across 9 schools, 15 schools, 72 schools. So yes, you have some people in education that have done that, of course, and they're more than happy to guide you and support you, but you might want to do something your own way and innovate and be different. So don't be afraid to look outside. They're just as welcoming outside of education as we are inside. But I've had some really fantastic insights on how to do things on a mass scale. Even if, when I say mass, it can be 4 schools, but that's still more than we ever originally anticipated in education. We were working on 1 school model and a local authority doing it for us all. So don't be afraid to trial and error, even at that scale, is what my message is, I think. And also to ask people outside of our sector, what do you do? Because they've been used to doing it for years and years and years. Maybe not successfully, maybe successfully, but you can also learn from some of their mistakes as well.
Big question is, which trust is going to be the first to have their own haka?
I would love to. I would love to. But in the book that I've written in, there's a beautiful passage. There's a beautiful part from a head teacher in New Zealand. It's beautiful about the culture and what happened. Yeah, absolutely.
They do culture well over there.
Yeah,
right. Final question for the panel. This is a rapid fire single question. You got 30 seconds each to answer it. What remains to be figured out when it comes to professional development? What question do you hope that might be answered in the next 5 to 10 years?
Exactly what works and why it works so well. There's
that.
Genuinely in 5 seconds. I think that's the thing. We have an idea. I was very lucky to listen to Dylan William last night say essentially we know what worked, but we don't necessarily know what works like everywhere, every time. And yes, we'll never have an answer particularly to that. I'm not sure we'll entirely figure it out, but I think the closer and closer we get to figure out models of excellence around things, it really does help in terms of what we do.
I'm quite interested in leadership CPD as well, and how there's so little out there about what makes a good leader and what CPD we can offer to leaders to improve them. I think there's very little that we really know concretely about that.
I think from my perspective, I think it's been on a lot of people's radar at the moment, AI, and how is it going to incorporate and support us? We shouldn't be scared of it. I read Scary Smart the other day and it terrified me, but I picked myself off the floor and thought actually we need to be the parent to AI because it is here, and how are we incorporating that into our professional development, because we need to equip ourselves as a profession. But it's happening so quickly that where do we seek that support from to incorporate and give us back that time that we so desperately need?
No doubt the next 5 to 10 years we'll see some AI related changes. Yes, what they will be, hard to anticipate, but yes, I think that's a good observation. Folks, I'm going to wrap up now by doing 2 things. Firstly, by saying a huge thank you for taking some time out this evening to have a chat to each other, and the kind of everyone who's here about professional development, how to make it work in schools and trusts and at scale. And then finally, just to give a bit of an overview of one of the programs that we have been working hard on at Ambition to try and help schools and trusts to make professional development work really well in their context. So one of the programs that we've kind of redesigned recently is called Transforming Teaching. It's a 1-year whole school program designed to help schools boost PD, improve classroom teaching, and ultimately pupil learning, of course. And it is, like it says on here, a program that trains not only your senior leadership team, all of your senior leadership team, but up to 4 teacher educators or leads of professional development or teaching and learning, and 30 of your kind of highest impact, highest potential teachers. So kind of is a multi-pronged attack on trying to improve teaching within school. It's not just about staff training. We've also thought really hard about how we can build capacity so that what schools learn through transforming teaching goes on to continue to help them improve in the future. And finally, it is highly tailored. So we got a range of packages with different degrees of input depending on what you need most as a school or a trust, and also includes like a unique diagnostic survey instrument for schools that sign up to the program, things like that. So anyway, to sum up, it's a full 1-year program to train not only your senior leaders but your professional development leads and a whole bunch of of your best or sort of most potential teachers, as it were. If you're interested, head over to our Ambition website to check out more. So just a little pitch on one of our new programs or refreshed programs to check out at the end of today. So there we are, we're finished on time. Everyone likes a bit of punctuality in education because time is so precious. So I'm going to draw the line there, say once again, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great evening.